The morning Tina Satchwell disappeared began like hundreds of other mornings before it. Quiet, unremarkable, almost forgettable. And perhaps that is what makes it so painful to remember. There was no scream that echoed down the street, no sudden violence that shattered the calm. There was only silence. The kind of silence that settles into a house and never truly leaves. Tina was 39 years old, an ordinary woman living an ordinary life in a small Essex town where people waved at neighbors but rarely knew them deeply. She liked routine. She liked her tea strong, her mornings slow, and her home tidy. Friends would later say she had a gentle nature, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke, who remembered birthdays, who apologized even when things weren't her fault. She wasn't famous. She wasn't powerful. She was simply human, and that is why her absence would hurt so much. That morning, the house looked normal. Too normal. The kettle sat on the counter. Her handbag was still inside. Her phone, which she rarely went anywhere without, lay silent. Her coat hung untouched. Nothing suggested a woman preparing to leave forever. Nothing suggested danger. And yet, by nightfall, Tina Satchwell was gone. At first, no one panicked. People don't immediately imagine the worst when someone doesn't come home. They tell themselves stories. She needed space. She went to clear her head. She'll be back tomorrow. Even the police, when they were finally contacted, treated it cautiously. Adults are allowed to disappear, they said. Sometimes people walk away from their lives, but there was something unsettling about the way Tina vanished. No money withdrawn, no goodbye note, no packed suitcase, no trace of movement beyond the walls of her own home. It was as if she had stepped into thin air and been erased. Her husband, David Satchwell, spoke softly when questioned. He appeared calm, almost detached. He said they had argued. Nothing serious, just the kind of argument couples have. He said Tina had left the house. He didn't know where she went. He looked people in the eyes and spoke in measured tones, the kind that sound reasonable, practiced, controlled, yet those who knew Tina felt an ache that would not settle. She was not the type to vanish without telling someone. She was not reckless. She was not cruel enough to disappear and leave her loved ones drowning in questions. As the hours turned into days and the days into weeks, hope began to rot into fear. The house became a place of quiet torment. Tina's things stayed where she left them, as if she might return at any moment, a half-finished life frozen in time. Her family visited, walking through rooms that felt wrong without her presence. Every object became a reminder. Every corner whispered her name. Police searched the surrounding area, fields, roads, rivers. They questioned friends and neighbors. Nothing, no sightings, no leads. The case slipped into a familiar, terrible category: missing, presumed voluntary, with no evidence of foul play. But time is a strange thing in cases like this. It does not heal, it sharpens, it presses harder on the unanswered questions until they become unbearable. Tina's family aged while waiting. Birthdays passed, holidays came and went. Each year without answers reopened the wound. Somewhere, in the quiet of the night, her mother would wonder if Tina was cold, or scared, or already gone. And always, there was the house. It stood there, unchanged, as if mocking the absence. People drove past it without knowing that inside those walls a truth lay hidden. Stairs that were walked up and down every day. Floorboards that carried footsteps. A home that knew more than anyone else. Years later, when the case was reopened, it wasn't because of a confession or a witness. It was because someone finally listened to the silence. A new investigator looked at the facts not as isolated pieces, but as a story that didn't make sense. A woman vanished, but her life was still there, her belongings, her plans, her routines, everything except her. The question that haunted the investigation was simple, yet terrifying. If Tina never left the house, then where did she go? In the early days, no one wanted to believe the answer might be closer than anyone imagined. It's easier to think monsters live far away, in dark alleys and abandoned places. It's harder to accept that sometimes, the most terrible secrets are hidden in familiar spaces, behind closed doors, beneath ordinary stairs. As night fell on the day Tina disappeared, lights glowed softly in nearby houses. Families ate dinner. Life moved forward. But somewhere in that quiet street, a truth was buried, not just in the ground, but in denial, in fear, and in the human need to believe that evil could not possibly be so close. Tina Satchwell did not leave a trail behind her. She left a void, and that void would grow heavier with every passing year, waiting patiently for the moment when the house would finally be forced to speak. Time did what it always does when answers refused to commit, moved on without mercy. Days turned into months, months into years, and Tina Satchwell remained a name spoken in hushed tones, a photograph that never aged, a question no one could resolve. The world beyond the small Essex street kept spinning, but inside Tina's family, Time had stopped the moment she vanished. David Satchwell continued living in the house. That alone unsettled people, though no one could explain exactly why. He carried on with his routines, went to work, spoke politely when spoken to. When asked about Tina, his words were careful, rehearsed, almost distant. He spoke of her in the past tense, far sooner than most people found comfortable. Yet nothing he did crossed a legal line. Suspicion, after all, is not proof. Police interviews in the early days were brief and procedural. David said they had argued. Tina had been emotional. She needed space. He claimed she walked out. But when investigators pressed for details, the story softened and shifted. Times blurred. Small facts changed. Nothing dramatic enough to accuse him of lying outright, but enough to leave an unease that lingered long after each interview ended. Friends began replaying old memories in their minds, searching for meaning. Arguments they once dismissed as normal now felt heavier. Moments of tension resurfaced with new weight. Someone remembered Tina going quiet whenever certain topics came up. Someone else recalled her saying she felt trapped, though she never explained why. At the time, it sounded like stress. In hindsight, it sounded like fear. The house itself became a symbol of everything unresolved. It was not ransacked. Nothing was broken. It looked like a place where life had simply paused. Rooms stayed tidy. Furniture stayed in place. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to return. Visitors said it felt cold, even in summer, as if warmth had been drained from its walls. Public attention slowly faded, as it often does. New stories replaced old ones. Tina's face appeared less frequently in newspapers. Her name slipped further down the list of unsolved cases. But for her family, the disappearance never became old news. Every phone call carried the hope of an answer. Every knock on the door brought a rush of fear. Years passed, and the pain did not dull. It sharpened. Not knowing is a special kind of cruelty. Grief usually comes with finality. This did not. There was no body to mourn, no grave to visit, no certainty to hold on to. Just endless questions looping in the mind, day after day, night after night. Behind closed doors, the marriage Tina left behind began to feel more like a performance than a partnership that had ended. David resisted certain searches. He objected to suggestions that felt invasive. He insisted the past should be left alone. He spoke of moving forward, even as others felt stuck in place. Each refusal, each defensive reaction added another invisible mark against him, though still not enough to act on. The case file gathered dust, but the silence inside it grew louder. When a new detective eventually reviewed the records, what struck her was not what was there but what was missing. No evidence of Tina planning to leave, no sign of a new life waiting elsewhere, no indication that she wanted to disappear. Instead, there were details that had been overlooked, dismissed as insignificant in the early days. She noticed how often the house appeared in the statements, how many times Tina was last placed inside it, how the timeline ended at the front door with no witness seeing her cross it. The detective returned to the property, walking slowly through the rooms, not searching for objects, but for patterns, for things that didn't belong, for spaces that felt wrong. The stairs creaked beneath her feet as she climbed them. They were narrow, ordinary, unremarkable. Hundreds of people had walked up and down them without ever imagining they could be part of something darker. But something about that space lingered in her thoughts. A place people pass without looking. A place no one questions. Sometimes, the truth hides not in what is obvious, but in what is familiar. The detective left the house that day with a feeling she couldn't shake. A quiet certainty that Tina had not gone far. That the answer was not out in the world, but closer than anyone had been willing to admit. As the door closed behind her, the house stood silent once more. It had kept its secret for years. But silence, no matter how long it lasts, eventually breaks. And when it does, it leaves behind echoes that can never be undone. When the investigation returned to the house, it did not arrive with sirens or shouting. It came quietly, almost respectfully, as if the walls themselves deserved warning. For years, the truth had slept beneath ordinary footsteps, beneath daily routines, beneath the comforting lie that if something terrible had happened, it would have been obvious. Another lie was beginning to crack. The forensic team moved slowly, deliberately. Every room was photographed again, every measurement taken as if for the first time. What once seemed normal was now examined with suspicion. The house was no longer just a place where someone had lived, it was a potential witness. And witnesses, even silent ones, tell stories. David Satchwell watched from a distance as the search unfolded. His face showed irritation more than grief. He spoke of invasions, of being tired of reliving the past. His voice rose when questions lingered too long on certain details. The calm control he had maintained for years began to slip, just slightly, like a mask no longer fitting quite right. Investigators returned to old statements, laying them side by side. Words spoken years apart failed to align, timelines bent under pressure, simple questions produced complicated answers. The past, once thought safely buried, was being dragged back into the light. Attention returned to the staircase not because it was dramatic, but because it was ignored. A structural void beneath it, small and hidden, designed to be unseen. Building plans were studied, measurements taken. Something didn't add up. The space beneath the stairs was larger than it should have been, too solid in places where hollow should exist. When permission was granted to dig, the air changed. Even those trained to remain detached felt a weight settle in their chests. Breaking into a home is one thing. Breaking into the truth is another. Dust filled the air as flooring was removed, each sound echoing louder than it should have. Every scrape of metal against concrete felt final. And then, the moment came. What they found beneath the stairs did not scream or shock in a cinematic way. It silenced everyone. Human remains, carefully concealed, deliberately hidden. Years of questions collapsed into a single, unbearable certainty. Tina had never left the house. She had never walked away. She had been there all along. For the investigators, the discovery was professional confirmation. For Tina's family, it was devastation wrapped in relief. Relief that the waiting was over. Devastation that hope, no matter how fragile, was finally gone. The truth, when it arrived, did not heal. It wounded all over again. David was arrested shortly after. The calm man who had once spoken so softly now appeared smaller, cornered by reality. In custody, the stories unraveled. What had been carefully constructed over years could not withstand the weight of evidence. Silence, his strongest weapon, had finally failed him. News spread quickly. Headlines spoke of betrayal, of deception, of horror hidden in plain sight. People who had walked past the house for years felt sick knowing what lay beneath it. Ordinary stairs became a symbol of something monstrous. Trust, once broken, infected everything around it. Yet amid the shock, one truth stood firm. Tina was no longer missing. She had been found. Her name was no longer attached to uncertainty, but to truth. And though justice had come painfully late, it had arrived nonetheless. As the house was sealed and the investigation moved toward court, it stood empty, stripped of its power to hide. The stairs remained, but their secret was gone. The silence they once protected had been replaced by something louder. Truth, and truth, once uncovered, cannot be buried again. The courtroom was quiet in a way that felt heavier than silence. It was the kind of quiet filled with held breath, with years of grief pressing down on wooden benches and stone walls. Tina Satchwell's name was spoken aloud again and again, no longer as a missing person, but as a woman whose life had been stolen and hidden away. Each time her name was said, it seemed to pull her closer to the world she had been denied for so long. Her family sat together, carrying the weight of answers they had waited years to hear. Closure, they would soon learn, did not feel like peace. It felt like standing in the ruins of hope, finally seeing the shape of what had been lost. There were no tears left for the moment. Truth arrived only, a deep, hollow ache that words could not reach. The evidence unfolded slowly, methodically. The house, the stairs, the space beneath them. Ordinary things transformed into symbols of deception. Experts spoke in measured tones, but nothing could soften the reality of what had been done. Tina had been reduced to silence within the place she once called home, betrayed by the person who should have protected her most. David Satchwell listened as his past caught up with him. The control he once held was gone. The careful distance he had maintained collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. There were no dramatic confessions, no emotional outbursts that could explain away the years of lies. There was only accountability, arriving far too late. When the verdict came, it did not feel like victory. Justice does not celebrate in cases like this. It settles quietly, carrying sorrow instead of relief. The sentence could never measure the years Tina was denied, the birthdays missed, the moments that never happened. It could only acknowledge that her life mattered and that what was done to her was wrong. Outside the courtroom, the world continued as it always had. Cars passed, people talked about ordinary things, and yet something had shifted. A truth once buried beneath stairs had now reshaped everything it touched. The house was no longer a home. It became a reminder of how easily darkness can hide behind normalcy, how often warning signs are overlooked because they are inconvenient. For Tina's family, the future remained uncertain. Grief does not end when truth arrives. It changes shape. It becomes quieter, heavier, more permanent. But there was something new now, something that had not existed for years. Certainty. Tina had not been forgotten. She had not vanished. She had been found, and her story had been told. In the end, Tina Satchwell was more than a headline, more than a case number, more than a tragedy hidden beneath a staircase. She was a woman who deserved safety, honesty, and love. Remembering her means more than knowing how she died. It means acknowledging how she lived and refusing to let silence protect cruelty ever again. If this story leaves you unsettled, it should, because stories like Tina's are not rare, they are simply hidden. And the only way to honor her now is to remember her name, to speak it, and to share her story, so that the quiet never becomes a place where truth is buried again.